This video is in two parts. Introduction to the perimenopause runs for the first 16 minutes, and learning to use the Daily Perimenopause Diary runs for the final 28 minutes.
Hello everybody. We've got 3 reasons to be here today. One is to get to know each other better. A second is to understand a little bit more about perimenopause, that confusing time between being young and being menopausal. And thirdly, to learn how to keep a diary so that we can understand what's going on for ourselves. I think the first thing, the way to start, is just to share a little bit. And I'll start by confessing that I'm 55 and proudly that I graduated. I'm no longer perimenopausal, and I have to say it was a bit of a struggle for me personally. I first knew I was in perimenopause because I woke with a bad hot flush at about 5 in the morning. And I didn't even know that was what was happening. My first feeling was just being angry. And I searched for somebody to blame for this wide awake. And then all of a sudden I got this wave of heat. And in retrospect, even before that, I noticed I'd had a little more PMS and that things were changing in my cycles. So that happened in the fall of 1990. So it took me a good long while, namely more than 7 years, to get to be 55 and 2 years beyond my last period, which I am now. What was frustrating for me about my own experience about perimenopause is that I had this idea in my head, as a doctor, as just a member of the public, that what was going to happen to me was going to be that my estrogen levels were going to start dwindling. My periods would get farther and farther apart, and one day I'd realize it had been a year since I had one, and that'd be it. And instead, what I was going through was not little estrogen, not less, not dwindles, but more. Sore breasts, breasts getting bigger, fluid stuff, mood stuff. And to my frustration, I used to be able to run a little longer, a little more conscientiously, and make it get better. And then that didn't work anymore. So I had to try to figure out for myself what was going on. And what I found was that keeping this diary helped me to feel like I was learning something. So I think perimenopause isn't going to be fun for a lot of people. But if you feel like you're learning something about yourself, then you don't feel so out of control. Which has got to be one of the worst things about perimenopause, is this feeling like your body is in your face, as they say. So I'm glad to have graduated, and I hope that what we do here today will help other women to go through this confusing process a little more easily. All right, let's start now and talk about the Daily Perimenopause Diary. I think the first and most important idea about it is it's for you. I told you earlier that I think it'll help me as a doctor or your doctors figure out what's going on. But most of all, it's for you to understand what's going on for yourself. It's organized in such a way that you start a new diary when you get a new flow. So at the beginning of a period, you start a fresh sheet. That makes it easier to understand how things ought to be and then how they're lined up. You need to put below the day 1 of your menstrual cycle what the day is. So, whatever date it is, put that in the little box below. Now, the next item is flow, and this time we're recording it as how many soaked pads or tampons you would use that whole day, from night through to the next night. And now, often we change when they're not completely soaked. So try to figure out if you've changed about a third filled ones. 3 would make 1. So you'd write down 1. And the reason for that is that some people may think of flow as being heavy, where for somebody else it'd be light. So it's trying to actually figure out how much blood is lost. Because some women get used to having 8 soaked tampons in a day and 10 days of flow and don't realize that that's very heavy. In fact, anything more than 16 soaked pads or tampons in a whole period is too much. And the average is much more like 6 or 8, really. The next section of the diary has a scale that goes from 0 to 4. 0 means you didn't have anything that day, and 4 means it's intense or strong. Because flow is such an important part of problems that women can have in the perimenopause, it's recorded a second time using that kind of scale. So 0, no flow that day, but 1 is a spotting, and 4 would mean you're changing your pad or tampon every hour or so, or you're flooding through, or you're having clots. So that's a heavy flow, or you'd record a 4. The next item is cramps, menstrual type cramps. One of the characteristics, again, and I can't explain it, about the perimenopause is that you can get cramps that don't come just before the period when we expect them, but in fact any time in the month. And another peculiar thing is that women who had cramps, say, when they were teenagers, then they had their kids and their cramps went away, it can come back again. So that's another thing that's associated with flow but may become sort of mixed up in the perimenopause.
I have a question about cramps. I didn't notice that before, but lately I notice whenever I'm menstruating, I have cramps, and it always ends up in diarrhea. So is that also a perimenopausal sign?
It may very well be. That sounds like what happened to you happens to lots of people. They are there when you're littler, or you don't have them, and then you start getting them toward perimenopause.
I see.
All right, the next section is 2 questions or 2 lines about breast tenderness. And this doesn't mean necessarily it's painful, but it means that if you touch it, you will get tenderness or pain. One of the reasons that we pay attention to breasts, or I try to teach women to pay attention, is because especially the front of the breast is a very sensitive measure of high estrogen. Remember, we were talking before about the middle of the month, just before the egg is released, if ovulatory cycles are occurring. That high estrogen can sometimes be enough to make the front of your breast or the nipple area sore. And when the whole breast is sore, it means that the breast is seeing lots of estrogen, being exposed to lots of estrogen. Now, there's another particular part of the breast, which is the next line, and that is way up high on the side of the breast, sort of up underneath the armpit. And when the whole breast is not sore, but it's a little tender there, that's a good sign that progesterone is there. You have to have estrogen also, but that's a reasonably good sign that you've ovulated. If the whole breast is okay, but there's a little tenderness there before your period. So that would fit, it would tell you, for example, if you had a little bit of soreness in the front of the breast in the middle of the month, the soreness went away, and then it was sore on the side, that would give you a pretty good idea that you were ovulating in that cycle. Any questions?
To the touch? It's not.
Well, sometimes it can be quite sore. And a friend of mine goes around like this, sort of guarding herself. and you know, so sometimes it can be sore enough so that it hurts when you take your bra off, or, you know, you really wince at the thought of bumping into something.
But doing the diaries, is that something you should
That's
touch
right.
every night just to see?
Yes. Actually put the flat of your hand on your breast and push in. Okay. And the same is true for the side of the breast.
I've had that pain on the side, and I didn't even know that it was associated with the perimenopause.
Well, it can occur in ovulatory cycles in younger women also. It's a good sign of ovulation. But again, most people don't know about that. Okay? Now, any kind of high hormones can make the body hang on to fluid. So that can show up as a bit of a bloaty, swollen tummy, can show up as puffy feet at the end of the day, puffy hands in the morning, or getting up more than you're used to at night. I mean, it's pretty common for women to get up at night and go to the washroom. But you may find that you're getting up more, twice, 3 times instead of maybe once or not. So fluid retention is the next line on the diary. Now, the whole next section, and there's 4 lines, relate to hot flushes. Or you can call them flashes, some people call them, actually there's a sort of slogan that goes, I don't have hot flushes, I have power surges. In other words, so they're called all kinds of different things.
But in that, in that hot flushes, you're counting in the wring the sheets out sweats?
Yes, it's all the stuff that goes together with a feeling like you're too hot, or a wave of heat, or sometimes people feel really hot and don't sweat. People differ quite a lot in that, but that's all called a hot flush. Hot flushes can happen during the time when you're awake, or they can happen when you're sleeping. So there's 2 lines for the daytime ones. The first line is how intense it is. You can have a hot flush that's sort of just a minor wave. Nobody around would be able to tell you had one. Or you can have one where you're just dripping. It's like a tropical rainstorm. So that would be a 4, and the other would just be a 1, barely perceptible. Then the other characteristic about hot flushes that's important is how many times. People can have them as frequently as every hour. And that gets exhausting, especially if you have a big sweat with each one. So the first line, how severe on average during your waking day were the flushes, and the next line, how many times. Now, it's hard to remember exactly how many, and I don't want you marking on the palm of your hand how many you had, but just roughly how many can you remember in the waking day. Then the same is true for during your time of sleeping. How intense was it? And usually it has to be 2 or more to wake you up. Occasionally I'll wake up because I need to go to the washroom and realize that I'm damp. And that probably was a 1 or a mild 2. It didn't really wake me up, but I was aware of it because I had to get up anyway. So during the time of sleeping, from the time you go to bed till the time you wake up, how many and how intense are they, are the next 2 lines. It turns out that the vaginal secretion actually made by the opening of the uterus, the cervix of the uterus, is stretchy, makes a clear thread when estrogen levels are high. So paying attention, which is the next item on the diary, to the stretchiness of the mucus is another gauge, along with front of the breast, in telling when estrogen's high. Now, a little bit of estrogen will just give a shiny or a tiny bit of stretch, but a high estrogen, like the mid-cycle peak of estrogen, can make a thread that'll stretch out maybe 2 or 3 inches, 4 or 5 centimeters. So if you're aware, you see the shiny mucus when you wipe yourself, or you're aware of more mucus, you can take 2 pieces of tissue and pull it apart and see if it makes a thread and how long that stretchy thread is. Now, the next line is constipation. It's not there because it's definitely related to hormones. It's there because it's a common thing for modern women. So recording whether or not you have regular bowel movements, you're not having cramping and all the stuff that goes with not having a regular bowel movement is an important health thing, just general health thing. Now, the next one is headache. And you mentioned headache. Often women do get a headache just before their period, but some women start having lots of headaches that aren't predictable, or for a few of us, migraine kind of headaches. And that again is very characteristic of perimenopause, especially when the woman is having lots of estrogen or lots of big estrogen swings. Now, the box for headache, again, we're recording 0 to 4. And if you don't have a headache that day, be sure to put a 0 in, and then your doctor or I or whoever reads it will know you looked at it and paid attention. But if it's a migraine kind of headache, you could have a really bad tension headache and put a 3 or something in the box. But if it's a migraine, put a dot in the box so it tells us when your migraines were happening.
What is actually a migraine headache? How different is it from an ordinary headache?
It's caused by blood vessels in the brain, actually, not by the muscles, which is what usually causes headaches. Often people can tell that they're going to get a migraine, sometimes by things like flashing lights, sometimes by other weird neurologic symptoms, really. Then when the headache comes on, it's often associated with nausea and vomiting. So they're pretty severe. One of the most common things I hear women complaining about, I guess that's fair enough, is I used to sleep like a baby. Why do I wake up all the time now? Why am I awake at 3 in the morning, ready to roar? And I don't think anybody understands why this is. It isn't simply because of hot flushes or night sweats. There's something about sleep pattern that does seem to change in the perimenopause. Now, the next 3 items have to do with how you feel. And sometimes people will say to me, well, I don't have any reason to be stressed. So how come I feel anxious? How you feel is how you feel, whether you have a reason or not. And feeling of frustration, sort of aggravated, feeling of depression or feeling of anxiety are real feelings, and they sometimes come out of the blue with no clear reason, so mood swings kind of idea. And to identify that, to recognize that's what's going on, is very helpful, because we often know how everybody else feels, but we don't often focus in on how we feel ourselves.
So those 3 items are actually what you feel internally and not external factors that makes you frustrated and anxious and so on?
They're how you feel, not how you should feel, not something you have to have a reason for, just how you're feeling. All right. Now, the entire bottom section of the diary is organized in a slightly different way. It's organized with a U for usual, and M and L for less, and Y and Z for more. In other words, we all have a sense of what's our normal, what's usual for us. Okay? Now, I put some things down here rather than up at the top because, for example, I wouldn't want anybody to have 0 breast size. All right? So the first item is appetite. And sometimes appetite, feeling hungry, is increased for no reason at all. And it may be increased for several days in a row without any explanation. Again, probably because the hormones are in overdrive.
Does that also go for cravings, like chocolate?
Sweets.
Sweets or salty. Sometimes, one patient said, my teeth feel hungry. Like searching everywhere. My teeth are hungry. Okay. The next one is breast size, because you may notice that there are changes in your breast that you can't account for. I think all of us have had the experience before our periods of getting a little bit bigger. But sometimes it comes and it stays for long periods of time and you don't get smaller again after your flow. And so breast size and changes in breast size are another one of those things that becomes unpredictable in the perimenopause. Now, the next one is interest in sex. This means how you feel about yourself as a sexual person. Doesn't mean you have a partner that's available. It doesn't mean that the candles are lit and everything's all set. It means whether you feel interested yourself. And again, that can change. There are some women who say, never, it's never going to happen again. I don't want anybody near me. A few women will say in the perimenopause they really want it more. But the most worrisome thing for some women is that they just don't feel interested. And I think that's perfectly natural, and it goes away if the relationship is good, if everything else is working well. It's not a permanent thing, but it's very common in perimenopause.
Does that also, sorry.
That's fine.
Does that also, meaning a decrease in responsiveness and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm.
So that will be also included in interest in sex?
Yeah, I think so. All right. The next one is feeling of energy. That's pretty self-explanatory. The energy to do the things you want to do, not collapsing as soon as you come home from work or whatever. And again, it may wax and wane. It may be high and good one day, even super high, like supercharged. And another day, just, I'm crashed, leave me alone, I need time out. So feeling of energy, greater or lesser than your usual sense of it is...
Sometimes I just don't want to do anything at all.
That's right, yeah. And I think we need time out then. We need permission to not do anything.
Okay.
Now, the next one is feeling of self-worth. How do I feel about myself as a person? Do I feel good about myself? Did I do something important today? Did I contribute? Am I good at what I do? And again, that changes. Sometimes I'll find that I write less or much less on that feeling of self-worth and look up and see I put 0 for depression. But maybe I am a little blue. It's one of the clues to being blue.
That's why I was wondering why it wasn't tied into the top part.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully we don't have 0 self-worth.
Yeah.
And the final one is you're trying to be as objective as you can about the stress you're under. It's like, you could pretend that you were Tinkerbell riding around on your shoulder and watching what this woman has to deal with every day. So try to incorporate in that the people that are asking you to do things, the time pressure, the finances, the relationships, all the stresses. They may not explain how you feel, but if you're under great stress, then all the rest of it has to be magnified and made more difficult. And what the diary does, kind of to wrap this up, is to give you some ways of fitting all the emotional, what's happening in your life, with the way your body is responding to these hormones. Because we can't understand what's going on until we know both. And we know it not, from a textbook or because some expert told us, but from our own experience, from our own self-record. That's the beauty of the perimenopause. It's a difficult time. It's a time of self-learning. And you can come out of it with a lot stronger feeling of resilience and of understanding yourself, of being ready for a different future, a different set of responsibilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Claire.
you.
Thank you.